Hello there, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Thank you very much for joining us. Courtney is unavailable today. I apologize. We missed our last. We've been trying to do daily updates. I think it's important, and I appreciate that a number of people have come to rely on them. There's some good news, which is unfortunately that's really happening is sort of changes in how many people are locked down and where, and death rates are getting updated. There hasn't been anything spectacularly new. There's some stuff we need to cover. Today's going to be an exception to that. I'm proud of the fact that In Time is usually ahead of the curve on things that we report. We have been on that drug. We were on a couple of other things. And occasionally we call something wrong, but I think for the most part, we're ahead of what you see on national news, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate our patrons. This has been a very taxing uh, couple of months for everybody, and it's harder, I know, to people have less money, so we appreciate those who show their support. It's important for us trying to run this show. Our Patreon link will be dropped in the live chat. If you'd like to become a patron, you can join us. We have a Patreon hangout one will be coming up. It's the first Monday of every month. We tried to also do a second one that we've been adding, but we've been a little busy, and I hope that you see the quality and it comes out. If you're noticing, this is going to be, I think, a little bit of a harder show. I received somewhat of a shock earlier today, and we've been trying to figure out how we're going to report it and how we're going to discuss it. It's not easy, but we're going to cover it, and we're going to talk about some things that appear to be rather different than how they've been reported, and how and why that is, and where to go from there. This is not. This is what we signed up for. I'd rather be reporting it than not, but I would rather not have to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So let's cover what we missed yesterday. Some of you already know it. Cuba has closed its borders to all non-residents. We have closed the border to Mexico. Only non-essential travel is going through. Italy has had yet another record-breaking day. Each day is a new record of how many people are dying as a result of this disease. Again, it goes up exponentially, not exponentially, not logarithmically. So we're going to continue to see those deaths rise. China has gotten it under control. We think that that's obviously evidence that it can be done. And if people take it seriously, and that's one reason we report it seriously, and that's one reason we think being honest about things is important. The CDC has said that as well, and that's why we're going to cover it the way we are today. 15 minutes after yesterday's broadcast, the day before, we had reported that 1/3 of California was essentially in lockdown. It wasn't official. There wasn't consequences for leaving, but they had been instructed by their own local governments, towns, districts had said, look, we want you guys to stay where you are. It was about 1/3. The governor then put the entire state in a shelter-in-place order. That made it the first state to statewide have an order that everyone is to stay indoors except for non-essential personnel. New York soon followed, as did Connecticut and Illinois. It looks like this is going to be a growing pattern of states ordering residents to stay indoors. There is still talk that the administration is discussing doing this on a national level. The administration denies it. Governor Mike Pence, former governor now, Vice President Mike Pence has denied it. However, we know they have been discussing it. We know that for a fact. Trump says now he doesn't anticipate it. I don't know what that means coming from Trump. It is estimated that 2.25 million people will have filed for unemployment this week alone. That is obviously a staggering number. Move on. Tax day has been moved from April 15th to July 15th. So there is a concerted effort. The U.S. government will not be filing foreclosures, will not be foreclosing on anyone's house. If you can't pay for it because you're out of work, you're going to be able to keep your house unless there's something different by your state. Obviously, people need to check in with their own state governments and figure out what needs to be done. But obviously, the government is attempting to make life reasonably easier for people. The CDC has relaxed most of its guidelines regarding disease control. This means masks can be used beyond their life expectancy and can be reused, even if you think you may have infected it or may have the disease on it. You can continue to use your mask. Governor of New York Cuomo has said that this is necessary in order to function. Again, the U.S. military hospital ship Comfort is going to New York. That will add over 1,000 hospital beds, increasing their capacity by about 5 or 10%, depending on how you calculate it. We reported on 2 drugs, chloroquine being one of them, and then Revaquin. Oh, jeez, I've forgotten the name of the other one. I'll look it up in a second. But we reported on 2 drugs that had been making some waves. We went over the only evidence that we had found for chloroquine that it was effective was a white paper. That paper misrepresents the data that it's using. We had one of our correspondents, a PhD in biochemistry, go over the paper, and she reported that that paper had actually absolutely zero backing in any scientific sense. It used only anecdotal evidence. The examples that it gave were actually for SARS treatment rates, not for treatment rates of COVID-19. COVID-19 and SARS are 80% similar, but you cannot, I mean, human beings and chimps are 80% similar, more than that, and you can't sit there. I'm sorry, I'm not going to, hey, I like chimps. I got nothing against chimps. I'm not going to ask a chimp to repair my car. I don't care how similar we are. There's certain things that I'm not going to ask a chimp to do. No, I don't know that many chimps in my life. Yes, I know more than I care to admit. Some of them are even on Twitter. At any rate, that similarity is completely irrelevant, and there is no evidence that it works. It may work, but there's no evidence. Donald Trump is strongly suggesting he feels it will. His gut tells him it will, and he's a pretty smart guy. So you should take him at his word. The head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease has said there's no evidence. And he has come out and said that. He said that within 2 minutes of Donald Trump saying his gut tells him it's going to work. So they're looking at it. It's got the benefit of it's already been approved by the FDA, which means that it can be used immediately off-label, and with any luck, it's going to work. There are people who are using it as I forget what it's called. It's a humanitarian care or something to that effect. You use it if somebody's dying and there's no other alternative. You sit there and throw it at it, hope it works. So Italy's using it. A few other countries will maybe get some data in on that. There has been some people taking advantage of this. There was the company that makes the other one, Revaquin, I think it is, has doubled their price for it, right ahead of China needing it. And also, the Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr sold a whole bunch of his stock right before the stock market started to plummet. He did, we know for a fact, have in his hands at the time information that would have led any reasonably thinking human to conclude that the stock market was going to plummet. So he had the information. He says the two were unrelated. It saved him, it looks like it was between 600,000 and 1.7 million dollars, somewhere in that vicinity. He was saved by selling his stocks early. So that's states are starting to get locked down. France is locked down. Obviously, a number of countries are locked down. There are orders in the U.S. Connecticut and New York has said that they will fine anybody who is in violation of those orders. My suspicion is it's going to get worse. More states are going to get locked down. Anyone listening to this should assume that reasonably soon their motions are going to be reasonably restricted. People can still go to the grocery store. They can still go to the hospital. But for the most part, anything that's non-essential will be completely locked down, probably across the entire United States. So that's where we are. And I appreciate for those of you who are listening and who are getting your news from us and trusting us to stay on it. I appreciate it, and we will continue to do so long as we can. All of us at this point probably know somebody who is sick or has a presumptive positive to it. It's been sort of stressful for everybody. And I failed to mention, by the way, so in today's report, tremendous thanks goes out to Ansgar Odinson. He is responsible for the vast majority of anything that is really critical in what we're going to be discussing today. So a very large thank you out to him. For those of you who know anything about how the unemployment rate in the United States is calculated. It's calculated as follows. They take the total number of, well, the unemployment rate is the number of people who are looking for work and cannot find it. That's what the unemployment rate is. That sounds very reasonable when you look at it at first, but there are a couple of problems with how it's calculated. In particular, um, in particular, one of the problems with how it's calculated is that it does not include people who are no longer looking for work. If you've been unemployed for 6 months, you may give up. You may just stop, looking. You'd like a job. If somebody offered you a job, you'd take it, but there are no jobs. So you're just not actively looking anymore. The reason it doesn't include those isn't because somebody just sat there and said, hey, let's take that number out. The reason is because it was just set up to for people who were looking for work. They didn't want to include, especially, I think this was, if I recall, it was set up in the 40s and 50s. They didn't want housewives. It's not about people who don't have a job, because there are some people who, and at the time it was like, okay, if you're a housewife, you're not looking for work, you shouldn't be included in the unemployment figures. You don't want a job. Well, what about the people who do want a job but can't get one and gave up? So sometimes the unemployment rate can drop precipitously when really more people are unemployed. But what's happening is people are giving up, they're not looking anymore, and so those numbers drop, and you get a false sense of what's actually happening with unemployment. Now, there are other figures that are more accurate. It's basically impossible to find a precisely accurate way to measure unemployment. But at a minimum, there are ways that are more effective. The unemployment rate can drop, and when you actually have a rise in unemployment. So those numbers are very difficult. When I worked on the Obama campaign, and I was active against Trump, and I remember at several points the Trump campaign would say, well, unemployment is dropping, when really it was going up. It's just, again, how you measure it, and vice versa. Obama got credit for drops in unemployment rate when the actual numbers went up. It's just that the rate itself went down. So that's how unemployment rate works. Why on earth am I bringing that up now? The way mortality rates are calculated by the CDC and the World Health Organization is they take the number of people who have it and the number versus the number of people who died, and you get a percentage rate. You take actually the number of people who died divided by the number of people who have it, and you've got the mortality rate. That seems to make sense when you take a look at it, and that number comes out to about 5 or 6% so far worldwide. 5 or 6%, which is really a very, very high number. We've had some people push back on that and say it's not a high number. It's a high number. If you were told, you'd have a 6% chance of dying driving to go get groceries, you would never go get groceries again in your life. 6% is astonishingly high, and if you get an illness that 6% of the people who have it die from it, you would not be comforted by that number. 6 is a very high percentage. It's also been discovered recently that for some reason the rate appears to be almost double in men. Men are dying from this at a significantly higher rate that appears now to be significantly more than anecdotal. That's just what's happening. So how and why, nobody yet understands. We will look into that and see if we can provide an answer for you, or at least what people think is to be the answer, but it's higher. Here's the problem. That rate is calculated with open cases. That means people who have the disease divided by the number of people who've died divided by the open cases divided by the number of people who have the disease. You get a mortality rate. That's the number you use. That's 6%. Here's the problem. There are people with those open cases who haven't died yet, who will. Those are the open cases. That includes somebody who is on a ventilator who is 6 seconds from dying. If at the time if at the exact moment that's calculated, some of those open cases will be mortalities. They're going to die. You could have someone who's 6 seconds away from dying, and poof. You can't use open cases. You have to use closed cases. Now, what closed cases are is people who, one way or another, the disease is done. They are no longer infected. This is because either their body successfully fought it off, or they have perished. One or the other. That method is not being used by the CDC or by the World Health Organization. Using that method, as of, probably about 2 hours ago, in the world, there were 107,000 closed cases. 107,000 closed cases. 94,674 were recoveries. 12,983 were fatalities. That's a fatality rate of 12%, twice as high as the percentage that's being reported by the CDC. Again, using the closed case method, the mortality rate for COVID-19 is twice as high as is being reported by the CDC and the World Health Organization. There is some indication that this is a well understood fact in China and that they have in fact been underreporting the deaths to match roughly what the active case calculation demonstrates. Now, there are a few issues with the closed case calculation. Let me suggest this at first, which is the reality is probably much closer to the closed case calculation, meaning the reality is that at this point, this disease is much closer in severity to the Spanish flu, which death rates on that one, nobody actually knows for sure. That was 1918. Their reporting methods weren't necessarily all that accurate, but death rates were anywhere. That was about 10% mortality rate, and that killed between 50 and 100 million people. So that, and they didn't have the sequestration, they didn't have the abilities that we have, they didn't have that was 1918. That was a long time ago, but that was astonishingly serious. So the couple of issues with that mortality rate are that there are people who get the disease and don't get it severe enough to report it. They don't go to the hospital. They don't ever go. So, again, this new number is not as accurate as we'd like it to be because there's no way to know who's gotten it and didn't report it. So this 12% number is not accurate either, but it is far more accurate than the 6% number because that uses open cases and doesn't take into account how those open cases are going to conclude. So at this point, I think the reality is that it is much closer to 12% than it is 6%. The 6% is not an accurate number. It's just not. It's open cases that have not yet been resolved. The China numbers, we're starting to suspect now, do look closer to this 12%, maybe 10 to 12%. Italy, we don't know yet. So I think that's a difficult number to look at. And but I think we are prepared to say that the reality is closer to that 12%. Again, that 12% is not the reality. It almost certainly is going to be lower than that. You've got another problem, which is we don't know how many cases have been diagnosed as the regular flu, where in fact this testing has been dramatically below what it should be. There have been a number of presumptive cases that maybe have gone into this number where it was actually just a regular flu and somebody died. And there are cases that haven't been reported. So we don't know the accuracy of this 12% number. My suspicion is, I'm going to use my Trumpian gut feeling, that we're probably looking at something close to a 10% is what I would guess it looks like, being somebody who is not an expert on this. We are talking with experts and we would like to get some on the air. But at this point, I think we are prepared to say that the numbers are quite higher than they've been reported. And that's a very somber reality. But I think that's what we're looking at, and I think that's important to know because I think a lot of people have been taking this seriously, and they're aware of how seriously the rest of this country is taking it and the shelter-in-place orders. Other than Florida, you know what? If you've decided that you want to go out with a bang, go to Florida. They're still celebrating. What is it? Spring break. A number of people. But we do know one other thing. Basically, at this point, we're pretty sure that China drastically underreported the number of young people who were getting this, and the young appear to be far more susceptible. By the death rate calculation, if you are over 60%, the mortality rate now appears to be, for people over 60, it appears to be upwards of 80% mortality rate. 80% mortality rate for 60 and older. That's a shocking number. The mortality rate for younger is not that high, but it's significantly higher than has been reported by the CDC, higher than has been reported by China. Now, we earlier had said that many of the numbers out of China, we've always treated the numbers out of China suspiciously, but they had World Health Organization advisors who were looking at the numbers and trying to make sure that the numbers were being reported accurately. But we have some indication now that they have not been. So that's where we stand. That's not something we would. That's a very difficult number to swallow. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spend a few minutes quickly. I haven't had a chance to go over the live chat. We do have one of our mods. I can't read the name without my glasses on. I can't read the name, but the mod is somebody who has pointed out that 70% infection rate with a 3% mortality rate in the U.S. would be tantamount to almost 7 million deaths. If and this I don't know what the infection rate is for this. It's high. This transmits much easier than most other viruses. Certainly much easier than the regular flu. The mortality rate is higher than 3%. Everybody agrees on that. The CDC is right now saying roughly 6%. Their active case calculation is based on 196,000 active cases. 187,000 appear like they will recover, and 9.3 thousand, which is roughly 5% mortality of that. But again, that's an active case calculation and is as inaccurate as the unemployment rate can be. So oh, that's right. Yes, the mod was Rodney Dangerfield. That is correct. Thank you for that. So Rodney Dangerfield is reporting that and we do trust him, and he's comes out with good information. But we don't. I can never tell who that guy is. So, and Spanish flu had 3 waves, yes, and they're preparing for the fact that this is going to have multiple waves. So I think what we're saying is we'd like everyone to treat this seriously. And we had on Dr. Sygart to discuss this, and he pointed out that calculating the mortality figures can be exceedingly difficult. So we on In Time are not prepared to say that the mortality rate is 12%. We're not, because there are difficulties with the the closed case calculations. There are difficulties. It could even be higher, probably lower. But we are prepared to say that the 6% is off, and it's off by a significant margin. Could be my personal guess is going to be it's about 10% is what we're looking at now. A 10% mortality rate, which is the same mortality rate as the Spanish influenza of 1918, which was extraordinarily lethal. I'm guessing it's about 12%. The closed case calculation is, I'm guessing it's 10%. The closed case calculation is 12%. It could be higher, could be lower. It doesn't calculate everything. There's some things we can't figure out. So that's what we're looking at. I hope everyone listening will treat this with the severity that it should be treated with. We are going to continue to cover it to some extent. I mean, this has been, we're going through a lot of material. This isn't easy to be on every single day covering it. So we're hoping that let's be honest, there's going to be some big stories. If the U.S. goes into lockdown, we're going to go live with that. We're going to keep doing this every day. We're going to shoot for the 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. There may be fluctuations in that, but we're going to keep broadcasting and letting you guys know what the updates are. So like and subscribe if you want to get all this news. I understand why some people may not want to know. But this is an educational program, and we're going to continue to do what we've said we're going to do. And if it turns out that there are a couple of days where there isn't anything major going on, even a couple of extra states, the states are now coming into lockdown. They just are, and it's going to get more serious. If that's all that happens in one day, we may skip a day. Some of us here need a break. But if there's something big, we will be here, as always. So we appreciate your trust. We wish everyone listening the best of luck. I think if everybody in this country we're going to say what we've always said, treat this seriously and with a somber view, and I think it's going to be the best it possibly can be. Don't panic. Don't go to the grocery store and wipe them out. Our food infrastructure system is still intact. Our government is still run by a turnip. Sorry, he's not one of the, what's a good orange flavored Cheeto boy. So yeah, okay, that doesn't instill me with confidence. Our state governments tend to be doing pretty well on this. They were locking things down before, while Trump was still saying that this was a joke. Um, the rest of the world is having issues. We do have one other thing I think to report, actually, now that I think about it, which is that the Uh, number of testing has actually gone down. Well, it's going up in the U.S., but it's going up slower than the pace that it should be going up. One of the things is that the U.S. is now, at least some state governments, including Massachusetts, my own state, I do know people who have now presumptive positives, but who the state will not test. They're reserving test kits for emergency workers. They're reserving the test kits for, so if you have a presumptive positive, what they're doing is they're giving clinical diagnoses. People are being diagnosed with having it based on the symptoms, but that's what's called a clinical diagnosis, and they're saying, okay, you're quarantined, you can't leave your house, but they won't test them because they're saving the testing kits for medical workers who, admittedly, like if you have a medical worker who's sick with the flu, you want to know whether it's the flu or COVID-19, and you have to know, because if it's the flu, you're going to make them work. And under these kinds of emergency conditions. And that's sort of where they are in New York now, too, which is people who are sick are essentially being forced to work. And that is possible under the War Powers. It is a War Power Act. It is not the War Powers Act, but under the act that Trump has, I believe, now activated, empowering him to direct the food and medical services of this country as needed. And I anticipate a nationwide activation of the National Guard. A number of states have activated the National Guard. Texas has activated the National Guard. If he activates it federally, he can actually redirect states and their National Guard to federal purposes, which I think would probably be in general a mistake. But we'll see. We will stay up with it. Again, I do apologize. These numbers are a little, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around some of them, and I was looking into these. This is new. So I wish everyone the best of luck. We will, again, stay on it. I hope you will like and subscribe and or become a Patreon. We will be having Patreon hangouts, and you get to direct access to guests and yada yada yada. We will have on, our regular schedule shows are continuing. We hope to get back soon to the Tuesday and Wednesday schedule, but we're certainly doing at least Tuesday shows. Next Tuesday we have Joss Martin, who is a minister, and he will be discussing the No True Scotsman fallacy, how it applies to Christianity and or to anti-theists, and what really, we're calling it the No True Christian Scotsman. What makes a real Christian? If you take a look at most Christians, they sit there and say, if you're not their kind of Christian, you're going to hell. But then again, they tell most atheists or anti-theists, hey, just believe in Jesus, you're fine. So we're going to talk about what really constitutes a Christian. Most Christians think it's only their brand, but we'll see. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to our next broadcast tomorrow, ostensibly 9 p.m. Until then, please, everyone, take care of yourselves and your family, and we're going to stay on it. So good luck to everyone. Thank you.